Hey, Stony Creek families. My name is Cassidy Hahn. I am one of the art teachers here at Stony Creek, and I have the privilege of sharing some exciting course offerings that we have with you here in the art department. I do have a presentation to share with you, so I'll pull that up on my screen. So typically, if you're looking for a good class to start out with in your freshman year, we start with either 2D art exploration or 3D art exploration. So 2D, we'll get to experiment with things like drawing, painting, and printmaking. So we have a good example here of that. So drawing, simply things, materials like pencils, charcoal, exciting things like that. Multiple different types of painting. Typically, we like to include at least two, like watercolor and acrylic. And then printmaking, I'll go into more in a minute or two. But essentially, printmaking is the art of making multiples where we can print on paper with ink. And again, I'll describe that a little bit more in a minute. Another great class to start out with your freshman year is 3D art exploration. And so this is going to start out with things like sculpture and ceramics and jewelry. Now, after a student starts out with 3D art exploration, then they can go even further if they want to into taking more specific classes. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But we would start out with things like sculpture, ceramics, and jewelry, which really essentially we can use any material. And a lot of the projects, we give students a lot of choice about what sorts of 3D materials they would like to build with. So again, these two courses are a great one to start out with your freshman year. And then typically we can go either on the 2D path and continue with these courses, or the 3D path, and we can continue with these courses. Or sometimes students change their mind and they go in between the two, and that's okay. You can also take 2D and 3D if you'd like to take both. On the 2D path, if you would like to continue with drawing and painting, we do have a course, we like to call it Draw Paint. And so in this course, we use materials like graphite, charcoal, pastel, ink, tempera. This is a great option for a student that was really successful and I'm really proud of their work in 2D art if they would like to continue that. And then a lot of our courses have an advanced option. So advanced drawing and painting is another great one. After you take Draw Paint, you can keep going even further if you would like to keep going down that path. And again, we're going to build on those skills that we learned in 2D and then kept working on in drawing and painting. Advanced drawing and painting, we like to give students a little bit even more of choice of what they like to work on in that course. And so it's just a great opportunity to build on the skills gradually. Photography starts out in the darkroom. So we do use film cameras and we develop in the darkroom. We start out with traditional darkroom and film photography. And then if a student chooses to continue down that path of photography classes, then advanced photography, we give students access to the Adobe suite. And then we discover even more about editing digitally and working with programs like Photoshop and Illustrator. Graphic design is another computer-based course. And so another one where we use the Adobe suite with Illustrator and Photoshop. And so essentially graphic design, we talk about the market of how essential designs are in the market and how we are bombarded all the time with advertisements and billboards and commercials and how important the graphic design industry is. And we get to practice in working with a lot of projects like that, like posters and making a branding kit for what does a brand need to do when they need specific graphic designs. And again, this is another course that has an advanced option. Typically, with the advanced courses, we like to give students more choice with their projects after they've taken a course like photography or graphic design. The advanced course, students get to still have specific projects in class, but still have a little bit more choice over how they would like to approach the projects. Video production is another great course where students get to think about the real world industry and how we, again, watch videos all the time, not only on social media, but commercials on television. And so, for example, we'll talk about things like what's the difference between a public service announcement and a commercial. So how are those two videos created differently? How is a movie documentary filmed differently than a studio commercial? Things like that. So we get to use some fancy film equipment like tripods, and we give students the opportunity to express themselves and make their voices heard through their videos. Now we're on to more of the 3D side of things, and ceramics and sculpture are two words that often get confused and sometimes used interchangeably, but ceramics is more specifically working with clay, and so sometimes those projects in that course are functional and non-functional too. And then we start with at least usually one wheel throwing project, but mostly hand building in that course. Things like starting out with a pinch pot and then gradually getting more complicated, and students spending more time on their projects, like maybe a mug or a vase, and students learn how are those projects fired in the kiln and then glazed, fun things like that. Sculpture, again, is a word often confused with ceramics, but the difference is sculpture, we get to use a wide variety of materials in that course. So students get to work with not only different materials, but different processes like building, carving, and molding, and how different materials sometimes mold together, and what materials don't work together as well, things like that. We get to discover with our hands, and so it's a very hands-on course. Jewelry and metals is another one of our 3D course offerings. And so this one is one we don't always run, but we would love to. And again, this is simply wearable art, sometimes functional, sometimes non-functional. We like to work not only with metal pieces, but other processes too, like wire and beads, and creating art that is meant to be worn, like necklaces, bracelets, rings, things like that. Printmaking, I mentioned before, but I'll go a little bit more in depth about it. It's simply the art of making multiples. So you can almost think of it as a stamp, where it starts off looking like a drawing that's carved into a material. Could be wood, or it could be laminate, anything like that. So we carve or we draw onto a surface, roll it with ink, and then almost stamp it onto another piece of paper. And so that allows us to make multiples. Think of it kind of like a stamp. So usually we like to do wood carving and collagraphs and things like that as well, working with a bunch of different materials, but mostly a flat surface to carve into, and then ink as well. These last two courses I'll talk about are AP ones, and so this is just something to keep in mind as you're looking to expand your options in your sophomore, junior, even senior year. This is what these courses could sort of lead to, just something to keep in your mind. We do have AP Studio Art, and this is where students create a portfolio for potentially applying to art college. And so this does allow students to often skip or get credit for a beginner art college, maybe a class that they would take their freshman year in an art school, like 2D or 3D. AP Art History is another one, and the name is sort of self-explanatory. We go way in depth, and we have about 150 pieces that we really focus on, but we go very in depth about the history of how art has evolved over time and how artists have worked over time, and the things that have changed and the things that have not changed over the time of how artists have worked. And this one is open to sophomores, juniors, and seniors. I hope this presentation was helpful for you in making your decisions and helping your students make their course decisions as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself, Cassidy Hahn, or also Amy McClanson is our other teacher. Thank you so much for watching.